Have you realized the pieces of your broken life have now been transformed into something beautiful? Hey there, I'm Danielle Zapchenk, and I appreciate you joining me today on the Parable Podcast. Today, you're going to meet Karen Calero, who is a worship leader and a future graduated psych major. Karen shares with us today about how she is continuing to heal from childhood trauma, and she is now dreaming of what is to come.
For so long, I remember little 6-year-old Karen feeling unprotected, unsafe, and him saying, like, I've got you secured, my daughter. I've got you.
Here's my conversation with Karen Calero. I am thrilled to introduce you to Karen. Karen, you are a resident of New York. New York City or just New York?
New York. Actually, to be more specific, I'm in Long Island.
Okay, so were you raised in Long Island, or is this like a whole new space for you?
I was actually raised in Queens, New York. Okay. And at the age of about maybe 16, when I was in high school, my parents decided to move to Long Island, which is not too far from Queens.
Okay.
I would say like 30 minutes.
My reference point is when I was I think I was a junior, maybe a senior in high school. I was in musical theater. And so like towards the end of like those years in high school, they did trips to New York. So we did all the sites that any tourist would do. What is like your favorite spot? And maybe it's not the natural like tourist attraction that people go to.
That's interesting because I actually live about maybe 30 minutes away from New York City, like Times Square, which is like a very touristic area. I actually like to be on the quiet side in Long Island. So I go further more east. It's like more country. And so I love the greenery, the green space. And so I'm pretty much, if I want to tour New York, I'll go out east to Long Island. Okay. And if I really want to have some excitement, then I can just take a 30-minute drive and go and be in New York City. And there's so much to do there.
Yeah. Karen, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're passionate about, what you do day to day?
So I actually am a worshiper. I lead worship on Sundays, usually at my church. I'm actually a pastor's kid. Currently, I've been a pastor's kid since the age of about 6 years old, actually. And so I'm always either busy at church, helping out, and I'm also a current student. I'm an undergrad student majoring in psychology. And so I'm either studying at church or spending some time with my husband, making sure that we're intentional about spending time together because sometimes it can get so busy. And then I'm also a research assistant that I'm a part of involved at my university. And so we're working with children, with numbers, data. And so there's always pretty much something to do. And it's just something that I'm very grateful that I get to do. And
yeah. What are you researching right now?
So right now we're researching sensitive parenting in communities that are marginalized, like the Bronx, Brooklyn. And so we're working a lot with children from the age of 1 to 5. And so we're kind of just bringing in interventions to help people with more resources in these areas. Yeah.
How did you end up into the field of psychology? Like, oh, that's exactly where I want to go. Because sometimes when you get into college, you think that there's a direction where you want to go, but then it kind of changes over time. What was that like for you?
It's a pretty long story.
Okay.
But I'll give you the shorter version. It all started really with my story of God really healing me, and it led me to seek professional help. I actually dropped out of high school when I was 14 years old. I was really battling depression, anxiety. So you found me sleeping pretty much most of the time as a high school student. And so I dropped out of high school when I was 15, and I got like a certification on like becoming a medical assistant, which only really took me like 4 months to complete. Yeah. And at that time, this was probably like 14 years ago, I didn't need a GED to get into that program. And so I kind of just did that. And I was working in the medical field as a medical assistant, and still do actually as a part-time. And I actually went back to school 4 years ago. And that's when God really started working in my life and healing a lot of things that I didn't even realize I needed healing in. And it was really hindering me a lot from dreaming big, really living out the life that God had promised me. And through a personal experience, seeking the professional help that I needed, I saw how much God used that as a tool to really bring healing into my life. And I just fell in love with psychology and the power of it. And I was like, I need to go back to school. I need to go back, get my GED, because I've become so passionate about this. And I got my GED, thank God, in April of 2021. And it took me about 3 months. And within the 3 months, I was able to pass the exam. And I said, no, I need to go back to college. And I went back to college, and that's how I became a major in psychology. And I'm now in my senior year, going to graduate in May of next year.
Okay.
So it's so exciting, but it's just very interesting to see how everything unfolded through my brokenness. And now it's something that I'm actually pursuing.
I love that you said that it unfolded through my brokenness. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and she kind of was just like, I wish I could just see, how this is going to go. Like, there's some tough seasons, like tough people in her life. And like, if we could just see these next steps, it would just be helpful. But I would, I'd be curious for you, Karen, like knowing what you've been through, looking back, can you see that trajectory of like how God was guiding you, even though you're like, this wasn't the traditional plan. This is wasn't what I wanted to happen in my life. But I had to go through it because of this moment.
Yeah. It's actually what God has really like taught me, that before I couldn't see and it didn't make sense to me. All I saw was like shattered brokenness. But now, years in, like everything is making sense to me. And I'm just like, everything that you have spoken over my life, God, like just the way that things unfold. And I wasn't the traditional typical student graduating high school, going to college, but I became a non-traditional student. And at first I was very kind of like hard on myself. And I'm just like, why couldn't I just finish high school when I was supposed to? I was full of regrets, and it left me feeling like a failure a lot of times. But it's just to see now how everything has just unfolded and fallen into place. I'm just like, wow, God, like I'm so grateful that it happened this way, because I've been able to experience him in such a supernatural way that I couldn't see before.
Thank you for sharing that. Karen, before we jump into another part of your story, how did you meet your husband?
So I actually met him through a mutual friend. He actually is from Canada.
Okay.
And so we had a mutual friend, and my friend told me like, you have to meet this guy. You guys are so alike. I think you guys would really hit it off. And I'm just like, I am not trying to date right now. I was 21 at that time, and I didn't even know what I wanted, but he was just so sweet, and I fell in love with his sweetness. Such a gentleman, very respectful, and I really felt very comfortable around him and safe. And so we hit it off as really good friends. We got to know each other, and then I'd say maybe 3 years later, we started dating. And a year after, we got married. And so now in November, we're going to be celebrating 10 years of
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. 10 years. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is definitely like my go-to question when I meet couples. It's like I asked this guy, I'm in an aqua class, and he was there with his girlfriend. I'm like, how did you guys meet? And they're like, online. And he was like hesitant about it, but I'm like, that's like totally normal now.
Yeah, that's the way now.
So that's amazing. All right. Well, Karen, I just think, just by talking to you right now, like we have so many pieces of our story in the broken, the messy, but it's also beautiful. Is your parable story, is it connected to what you shared about growing up, or is this a completely different trajectory?
Yeah, it actually has to do a lot with my childhood. And growing up, it was not an easy one. And so I unfortunately went through like childhood trauma. And to be more specific, I think if I think about what's my parable story, and I cannot not say this because it is something that God has really healed me from and continues to heal me. It's an everyday choice that I have to make and decide to allow God into. But just growing up, I went through sexual abuse, and it happened for so many years, from the age of 6 years old and up until I got to high school. And it was very hard for me. I was very confused. this is all I knew of.
Yeah.
It was giving myself up to someone else that was close to me. And so that for me was very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to deny and ignore how hard it was, but I'm just like at a place now where it's just, it doesn't bring me down like it used to, but it's just like, wow, God has been so faithful. Mm. And for me, it's just shows the power of his healing, a restoration, of just seeing how he takes something so shattered and broken and makes it so beautiful.
Karen, can I ask you, what was the point? I mean, obviously from 6 to high school, there's like something that happens. You know that eventually you understand that you're a victim. Who was the first person that you told?
My husband, actually. And I think that for me, when I got to know him, I felt very safe. And there were hidden parts of me that I had never spoken to anyone about. And it was something that I never even, though he already knew because he knows me, he knows us, God, I had never even opened up that part of my story to God. I kind of lived just life like hiding it, like everything is perfect. I lived in avoidance and everything is perfect. I can come to God, but I can tell him everything else, but not this. Mm-hmm. And so it got to the point where I actually started to get sick. I started fainting. I started having fainting spells. My blood pressure would go down very low. And I noticed that it was having an effect on my physical body. I was having a hard time dealing with stress, managing it. I kept living cycles of depression. I got to the point where I'm like, wait, this is not the life that God has for me. Mm-hmm. There's something much more than this. This isn't the abundant life that God has said he's given me. Yeah. And so I remember just breaking down and I told my husband, I need help. Mm-hmm. I need help. I don't want to live anymore. I'm going in cycles and it's just, this is not the freedom that God has given me. Mm-hmm. And I remember like just, you know, sometimes our prayers are just tears. We don't have words to say. And I remember just looking out my window, it was a summer day and I see the birds just chirping away and it's sunny and it's just so beautiful outside. But I was just so broken and everything looks so black and white. I remember saying, God, I need you to help me. Mm-hmm. I need you to help me, like rescue me, please. I can't live this life anymore this way. And I told my husband about that day and I'm just like, I don't want to do life anymore. And so I'm like, this is not okay. I think in that moment, God brought clarity to me. And I'm like, I need to seek professional help because I can't do this on my own. I'm at the point where I cannot do this on my own. And I came across a really amazing therapist and she had a very similar story to mine. And it was just amazing to see like what God had done in her life. And it really encouraged me. And I remember just even seeking out professional help for me was very hard because it's like a stigma within my culture that we don't go see a therapist because God is enough. And I remember like even feeling so bad about seeking professional help and it made me feel like I wasn't trusting God enough. And that left me feeling like a really bad Christian and failure. And I'm just like, God, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't trust you enough. And I just remember saying to God, like, God, bring peace to my heart that this is okay. And he did.
Yeah.
He did. And I just felt so much peace from him. And I have to say that the first year was very hard for me, unpacking a lot of hidden things and baggage that I carried, the shame, the guilt, the rejection. But it's in the moment where I said, God, I can't do this anymore. I surrender. I allow you and give you permission to come into my brokenness. That's when I started to see him at work.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I mean, I'm just so grateful when people share those personal stories. You said you grew up as a pastor's kid. We all have these ideas and constructs of what faith is, and that ebbs and flows as we grow and change. And here you are suffering as a child at the hands of somebody else. And how that affected your relationship with God. Because at some point you realize this is not right. And you're like, why am I suffering? Or why is this happening to me repeatedly? I'd be curious of like what your relationship with God and the trajectory of that, how that played out for you.
So looking back, I think it was a very superficial relationship. I attended church when I needed to, so that I'm a good Christian. I attended church on Sundays. I was helping out, always had a smile on my face, always try to be very kind to others and serving. And I was more concerned about other people's burdens and what they were going through. And so I just became a people pleaser. And I'm like, we don't talk about my brokenness. And so I thought that there was something wrong with me. I'm like, maybe, you know, there's something wrong with me. And I remember leading worship on Sundays, because I started leading worship from a very young age. I think about like 10 years old.
Wow.
And I remember those were actually times where, though I was still confused and I didn't really have this relationship with God, like this authentic relationship, I still felt him near. I just didn't know how to explain it at that time. But I just thought I serve the God that other people serve for them, but not for myself. And so I always mentioned that, you know, God can heal you, but he can't heal me. So I didn't think I was worthy of anything good for myself, but everyone else around me was worthy of that.
You had mentioned, Karen, part of your culture was, and I think that this goes for many people, seeing a psychologist, seeing a therapist, asking for help is wrong, especially when you are in a faith where God is going to take control. God can be in charge of that. And so what would your encouragement be now on the other side, that having somebody to safely talk to allowed you to maybe even learn about him more, learn about yourself more, and be able to heal? What would your encouragement be for that?
First of all, I would say it's okay to ask for help. God loves when we ask for help, because we can't do it on our own, especially when you've gone through something very traumatic, very hard, and not just traumatic in life, right? We go through hardships, and a lot of times we need to go to someone that we feel safe that we can go to. And so I just try to be very vocal about seeing someone, it's okay to seek professional help. I believe that it's a tool that God has given us to take advantage of it. And for me, it's just been a tool that has really helped me in my self-worth, to know who I am, to know who God created me to be. And there's no shame in seeking help.
Absolutely. You had mentioned earlier when you were sharing, when you thought about your relationship with God, you kind of just put it off this is for someone else. This isn't for me. And you've used words like regret, failure. You didn't find yourself worthy. When was the time where that started trickling in for you? Do you remember a moment that you're like, oh, wow, Karen is worthy. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of being able to go to school and to learn. And that shame just kind of started peeling off of your life?
You know, it actually was when I would show up to my therapy session and talk to my therapist. And she's actually a Christian therapist. And so she brought in a lot of truth and helped me unpack and expose the lie of the enemies, telling me that I wasn't good enough, that what had happened to me was my fault. And so just exposing that, talking about it out loud, and with the help of my therapist, really just helping me to facilitate and unpack that more, I came to realize the enemy really had me bound to his lies. It was a stronghold that he had over me. And it's kind of like a light bulb inside my brain went on. And I'm just like, wait, God loves me. He's loved me all along. And it's from that moment that I started to look back. It's kind of like this timeline. And I started to see all the moments where God really showed up through people, through someone that gave me a word that reminded me that God held me close in his arms. And it's just, unpacking that with my therapist through therapy sessions that I really started to really see myself for who God sees me.
Yeah. And that is a continual journey. When we have told ourselves that, when the enemy has kind of put all of these seeds in place in our life and they've grown, it is ripping them off over and over and over. And then they just keep popping up. So how do you consistently manage that? Because it's easy for something to trigger you and you're oh, am I worthy? Why do I start feeling shame in this way? What would be just some tools of how to manage that for any of us kind of walking through something and we're on the other side, but how do we continue that way?
Before, it would be like an automatic thing of like, say if I was triggered by something and I'm just like, I'd say to myself, like, you see, you're a failure. Like, you're not loved. And so now it's become an automatic thing because I've been more intentional about when I have a thought, like to challenge it and say like, okay, is this actually true? Like, what does the word of God say? Like, he says that I am loved. And so it's taking me time to be repetitive and to remind myself with this truth of who he says I am. I remember when I first started doing this, just challenging the thought, I would always ask myself, like I'd have these little conversations with myself, like, why do you say that you're not good enough? What is making you feel that way? And so I already knew the root of where it was coming from. And so every time that I had a trigger or I had a thought, it'd take me a few seconds and I would bring it to God and I'm saying, God, like, I feel this way. This is how I'm feeling. I was triggered. Just please remind me that you love me. And just saying it out loud just became like your exercise and repetitive. And I started to automatically start believing it. And I would say that it doesn't happen as often as it used to. And when that thought does come, I feel so safe that I could run to God when I felt that I couldn't do that before.
Karen, if you could go back to like your 6-year-old self and you could talk to her today and say, there's going to be some brokenness, but on the other side, there's this, what hope would you give your 6-year-old self?
That's a good question. I would say, you're going to be okay. God's got you. I'm protecting you. I'm defending you. I'm on your side. You're not alone. And just feeling the hugs and just the warmth. For so long, I remember little 6-year-old Karen feeling unprotected, unsafe, and him saying, like, I've got you secured, my daughter. I've got you.
Karen, you have this journey now that you're going to start this. Well, you're almost finished the journey of psychology. Everything that you've learned while you've been in college, has there been some of these things that have popped out that now you've been able to really encourage people that you've met, whether that's at church, whether you're at school, whether it's people on the street? Because of your story now, you're able to speak life, speak truth into other people. Has there been an occurrence like that for you so far?
Yeah, it's happened actually quite a few times actually on campus, and without even realizing, people have come to me, and it ended up being part of like the research team that I'm a part of. Like, they knew a little bit of my story, not to in depth, and they're just so encouraged and inspired to see like, wow, like you're doing all this. You just came back to school. You just got your GED, like with your story, like, how is it? How have you done it? And it always goes back to God. God has really helped me. And I just have these moments, like even learning through lectures where I saw little me going through that as a child. And a lot of my behaviors and tendencies make sense to me, like why I isolated myself, why I was very quiet and didn't really speak up, and other things. And I'm just like, wow, God, like you have really taken something so broken and you've made it whole and you've made it new, and it leaves me in awe. And I guess people around me can see that, and it's just, I can't say nothing but God. It's been God.
I love that you said the brokenness and just like how God beautifully restores that and cascades that into not only your life, but others' lives. And it just reminds me of what you said earlier, like you don't want to share it with anyone. I mean, because there is that shame that holds us, but because we share our stories, there is this openness and realization like other people have walked through this as well. Maybe not exactly in the same places, but gosh, there's just like that connection point. And I think that's why I love stories so much, because we can hear these pieces and you're like, okay, yes, God, like I know I'm not alone in this. Karen, I'm just like so thrilled for you, and like you're almost at the end of your journey, and like what good you're going to continue to do in the world, and how God is going to use you, and how beautiful that, you know, you had this psychologist, this therapist that worked with you, that Christian therapist, and now you get to be that for somebody. How amazing that trajectory shift. Karen, any final thoughts before we wrap up today? today?
I just want to say, if you're listening today and you have maybe gone through something similar and it's something that you maybe say, this is not something that I want to talk about, or something that's been hidden, you've been living in silence, I just want to say that God sees you and he wants to heal your heart. And if you would just allow him to heal your heart so you could feel and live that abundant life that he has for you.
Amazing words. Karen, if people wanted to connect to you or maybe hear a little bit more of your story, how is the best way that people can do that?
You could follow me on Instagram at KarenJC-.
Great. We will put all of Karen's information in today's show notes. Karen, it was a joy to talk with you today. Thank you so much, really, for sharing your story with us. And I'm just excited to see where God continues to take you.
Thank you, Danielle, for having me.
Wasn't Karen the sweetest? You know, if you have suffered through abuse as a child or even still today, I'm going to put some resources in the show notes about how you can reach out for help. But please take a lesson from Karen. There is never a wrong time to ask for help. To connect with Karen, simply visit DanielleZapchenk.com for details. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time with Karen. Number 1. What hidden or broken parts of your life have you chose not to give in over to God? I'd love for you to list those out or think about maybe those pieces you thought you did, you never really did in the first place. Number 2, I would love it if you would write a note, or maybe it is even a full letter, about how you are worthy to God. How you can release any of these false lies that you may have been holding on to in your own life. As always, the editing skills that go into the production of the Parable Podcast are all my husband. Thanks so much, babe. I am so grateful that you took the time to spend it with me. Remember, your Parable showcases how God uses the broken parts of your life to create this beautiful masterpiece of his faithfulness. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.